You know that feeling when someone just won't leave your mind? Like no matter what you do, work, scroll, sleep, they're there. It's like they've taken up permanent residence in your head without paying rent. I've been there. And for a long time, I thought I was just going crazy. I'd ask myself, why can't I stop thinking about this person? We barely even spoke. They didn't do anything special. And yet, it felt like they were haunting me. At first, I tried to fight it. I distracted myself. I rationalized. I told myself it was nothing, but the thoughts kept looping, not loud or urgent, just persistent. And one night, lying awake with this familiar face floating through my mind, I stopped resisting. I stopped trying to push it away and asked myself, what if this isn't random? What if my mind is trying to tell me something? That was when I started to see things differently. Carl Jung once said, that which we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. I think that's what this was. This person, or rather their presence in my mind, wasn't about them at all. It was about me, something buried, something unresolved. It's funny, we often look outside ourselves for meaning. We assume the story is about the other, but maybe the real story is what they awaken in us. For me, it wasn't some grand love or devastating heartbreak. It was more subtle, like a whisper from a forgotten part of myself. This person represented something, a memory, a part of me I had lost touch with, maybe even a longing I hadn't dared to name. I couldn't see it at first. I just knew they made me feel something I didn't understand. A mix of admiration, jealousy, maybe even grief. And that's the thing, we're taught to move on, to get over it. But what if the reason we can't let go isn't weakness? It's the soul trying to speak. The more I leaned into that idea, the more things began to shift. I stopped focusing on the person and started focusing on the feeling. What exactly was it that kept circling back? Was it their confidence, their presence, the way they seemed to own who they were without apology? I started journaling, not about them, but about what they triggered in me. And slowly, a picture began to form. I realized I'd spent so much of my life hiding, playing safe, avoiding attention, and this person, in their own way, cracked something open in me. They stirred a hunger I hadn't wanted to admit, a hunger to live more boldly, to be seen, to stop apologizing for who I am. That realization hit hard, because suddenly the obsession wasn't about them. It was about a part of me calling to be reclaimed. And I'll be honest, that shift wasn't comfortable. It forced me to look at the ways I'd been sleepwalking through life, keeping things small and neat so I wouldn't be hurt. But now that something had been awakened, I couldn't pretend anymore. That presence in my mind was like a hand gently shaking me awake. It made me wonder, how many people do we meet who serve as mirrors like that? How many times do we misread those encounters thinking we're falling in love or being pulled into some strange emotional spiral when in fact we're being invited inward? Looking back, I'm actually grateful for the obsession. It was uncomfortable, yes, but it was also a turning point. It broke through my numbness. It called me back to myself. And maybe that's what these experiences are for. Not to torment us, but to reveal us to ourselves. So if you've got someone living rent-free in your mind right now, maybe don't try to evict them just yet. Maybe sit with it. Ask the question no one teaches us to ask. What is this really about? Not what they did or didn't do. Not what could have been, but what they're reflecting back to you. Because sometimes the people who haunt us the most are the ones who, without even knowing it, hand us a key to something we've long buried. And yeah, it's strange, and it hurts a little, but it's also beautiful, because it means your soul is still speaking, still reaching for the truth, still pulling you toward the parts of yourself you're finally ready to meet. I didn't really understand the concept of the shadow until I lived it. It always sounded a little abstract, like something pulled from myth or poetry. But once I started to explore why this person kept showing up in my thoughts, I started to see it clearly. Not in theory, but in my own reflection. We like to think we know ourselves. We wear these identities, confident, kind, humble, creative, whatever it is, and we cling to them. But Jung had this idea that there's another side to us, a hidden layer, filled with the parts we've rejected or disowned, not because they're bad, but because they didn't fit the version of ourselves we believed would be accepted. That's the shadow. And this person, the one who kept echoing in my mind, was a living reminder of everything I had pushed away. It hit me one afternoon when I saw them post something bold, unapologetic, even a little arrogant. My first reaction was judgment. Wow, they're so full of themselves. But then something cracked beneath the surface. I felt envy, and not the petty kind. It was deep, aching envy, because what I saw in them was a version of myself I never let exist. They dared to take up space. I had always tried to shrink mine. They spoke loudly. I'd spent my life being careful. They let themselves be seen. I was still hiding, and that stung, not because they were wrong, but because they were free in a way I wasn't. They were living out something I had exiled within myself. That's when I started to understand that people we fixate on often carry fragments of our own shadow. Not just the traits we despise, though that's true too, but the ones we long for, the ones we never gave ourselves permission to explore. Sometimes it's easier to project those things onto others than admit we want them. So I sat with that discomfort. I let it burn a little. I started asking myself questions I'd been too afraid to ask. Why have I been silencing that part of me? What am I so afraid would happen if I lived more boldly, more honestly? And the answers were painful. I realized I had learned, somewhere along the way, that being visible was dangerous, that speaking up could get me punished, that owning my worth might make others uncomfortable. These beliefs had shaped how I showed up in the world. And now this person was stirring all of that up. They were like a flashlight shining on the part of me I'd kept in the dark. It's wild, isn't it? How someone can become a symbol like that. It's not about them as a person anymore. It's about what they represent, a mirror held up to everything you've hidden, denied, or forgotten. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I started to realize that the real work wasn't in getting over them. It was in getting honest with myself. I had to start calling those disowned parts home. Not to become them, but to integrate them. To say, hey, I see you. I've ignored you for a long time, but you belong here too. That's the power of shadow work. It's not about fixing yourself. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness means accepting the messy, inconvenient, embarrassing truths too. I won't pretend it was easy. There were nights I felt raw, vulnerable, like everything I thought I knew about myself was unraveling. But at the same time, something in me felt more alive than ever, like a door had been kicked open, and behind it was a part of me I hadn't seen since I was a kid. Fearless, wild, unapologetically curious. And maybe that's why some people stay with us. Not to torment us, but to wake us up. To say, there's more of you here. Look closer. So I did. I looked, and I started to find gold in the places I'd once tried to bury. If you're in that space, if someone's presence in your mind is lighting up all your fears and longings, maybe ask yourself, what do they awaken in me that I've forgotten how to love? Because that could be your way back to yourself. You know what's wild? Once I started peeling back the layers, I realized just how much of my life I'd been living inside a projection. Not reality, but some warped image stitched together from old wounds, unmet needs, and unconscious desires. And I had been casting that image onto people without even knowing it. It's humbling, really. That person I couldn't stop thinking about, I had turned them into a movie screen, Everything I longed for, everything I was afraid of, everything I hadn't resolved, it all got projected onto them. I wasn't seeing them anymore. I was seeing my own internal landscape, dressed up in their face, their words, their energy. And when I realized that, it broke me open. I remember a moment sitting alone with a cup of tea, scrolling through a photo of them. It hit me like a wave. I didn't know this person deeply, not really. I knew the version of them I had constructed, the confident, artistic, emotionally intelligent, magnetic being I had painted in my mind. But who were they actually? I had no idea. My obsession wasn't rooted in who they were. It was rooted in what I needed them to be. I think that's the trap we fall into. We don't fall for people. We fall for the roles they play in our inner drama, and Jung warned us about this. He said that projection is one of the most powerful ways the unconscious reveals itself. We see in others what we cannot yet face in ourselves. Sometimes it's admiration, sometimes it's resentment, but both are clues. Once I understood that, I started to track the patterns. It wasn't just this one person. It had been happening for years. With friends, lovers, even strangers, I had a whole system of projections operating under the surface like an invisible hand shaping my reality. That realization was liberating and terrifying because it meant two things. I had been giving my power away over and over again to illusions. I now had the responsibility to reclaim it. It's not easy. Our projections are sticky. They feel real. When we're drawn to someone, we swear it's about them. But more often than not, it's about us. What we crave, what we fear, what we've lost. And the worst part? Projections create distance. They stop us from actually seeing the person in front of us. We're not in relationship with them. We're in relationship with our idea of them. That's why it hurts so much when the illusion shatters. We feel betrayed, not by the person, but by the dream. And that heartbreak, it's the soul's way of reclaiming its projection and saying, this belongs to you, not them. So I started a different practice. Instead of spiraling into fantasy or frustration, I asked myself, what am I projecting onto this person right now? What qualities do they embody that I admire or despise? And do those qualities live somewhere inside me too? More often than not, the answer was yes. If I admired someone's boldness, it was because I hadn't yet owned mine. If I was triggered by someone's detachment, it was because I feared being abandoned. Every reaction was a reflection, every emotion a messenger. This shift from seeing others as causes to seeing them as mirrors changed everything. I no longer needed to chase or avoid certain people. Instead, I got curious. What lesson are they bringing me? What piece of myself are they asking me to meet? It turned obsession into insight, pain into purpose, and most importantly, it helped me take off the mask, not just theirs, but mine too. I started seeing the stories I'd been telling about love, worthiness, identity, and how tangled they had become in the lives of others. It's still a process. Some days I slip back into the old patterns. I catch myself romanticizing someone or feeling slighted by another. But now there's awareness, and with awareness comes choice. I guess what I'm trying to say is this: if someone is living in your mind, if they've become larger than life, impossible to shake, maybe you're not looking at them. Maybe you're looking at a piece of yourself that's asking to come home. That's not fantasy. That's the beginning of healing. I didn't expect it to go this deep, to lead me into the strange and symbolic world of anima and animus. I used to think inner work was just about healing wounds or letting go of the past. But what I didn't realize is that within each of us lives a dynamic, an energy that shapes how we see others, especially the people we fall hardest for. It wasn't until I read more of Jung's work that I understood we're not just projecting traits, we're projecting archetypes. pieces of the psyche that are genderless, ancient, and powerful. For men, it's often the anima, the inner feminine, emotional, intuitive, creative force. For women, the animus, the inner masculine, focused, assertive, directional energy. But it's not about gender, it's about balance. It's about the energies within us that we've repressed, idealized, or misunderstood. And here's the thing. The person who haunted my thoughts, they were an embodiment of my anima. They represented the parts of me I longed to connect with but hadn't yet fully integrated. Softness, depth, unapologetic emotion, a certain kind of soulful presence I'd always admired from afar, but never felt safe enough to live from. That's why they felt magnetic. That's why their voice, their words, even their silences stayed with me. It wasn't love in the romantic sense. It was longing for wholeness. It sounds strange to say it now, but I remember moments where I felt like I was seeing the divine in them, not in a spiritualized, unrealistic way, but in the way they illuminated a part of me that had been buried. And that kind of recognition can feel overwhelming. It's like staring into a part of your soul you forgot existed. I think that's what Jung meant when he talked about these archetypes. Sometimes we meet people who light up our anima or animus, and we feel captivated, not by them, but by the connection they stir within us. It's not about the other person's character or compatibility, it's about resonance. But here's the danger. We start confusing the inner image with the outer person. We overlay our unconscious ideals onto someone who can't possibly carry that weight. We turn them into symbols, and eventually those symbols crack under the pressure. That's when the pain begins, the disillusionment, the heartbreak. Not because they failed us, but because our projection collapsed. And suddenly we're left with the raw truth. The thing we were searching for in them was always a callback to ourselves. That realization gutted me, because I had romanticized this person so deeply, so quietly for so long. I had turned them into a lighthouse, a muse, a guide. But they were just a person, a beautiful one, sure, but human, flawed, and separate from the myth I'd wrapped around them. And you know what? That didn't make the connection less sacred. If anything, it made it more sacred, because I could finally see what it was teaching me. I could finally look beyond the illusion and ask the harder question. What parts of me are asking to be born? I started to realize that the qualities I saw in them, the ones I'd longed for, weren't foreign. They were just hidden, dormant, waiting for me to claim them. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to integrate them. I let myself write more freely. I allowed vulnerability to exist without shame. I leaned into intuition, even when logic begged me not to. I stopped apologizing for feeling deeply, for wanting beauty, for craving meaning. This wasn't about becoming someone else. It was about becoming more me. And that's the paradox. Sometimes it takes another person to awaken what we've buried, not to complete us, but to remind us of what's already there. So if you find yourself enchanted, obsessed, idealizing someone to the point where it feels spiritual, pause. Not to judge yourself, but to listen. What are they mirroring? What inner energy is trying to come alive through this connection? Because chances are they're not your destiny, they're your reflection, and that's just as powerful. There's this thing that started happening after all the inner work, and honestly, it felt eerie at first. I'd be thinking about them, and then they'd show up. A random text, a memory-triggered post. I'd run into them in the most unexpected places at the most uncanny moments. At first, I brushed it off. Coincidence, algorithm, wishful thinking, but then it kept happening, not just with them, with other people too, people I'd been processing, people whose presence had stirred something inside me. Thoughts would line up with moments, dreams would spill into reality. It felt like my inner world was starting to echo outside me. That's when I stumbled across Jung's idea of synchronicity, and suddenly everything made sense. It's not that life started following some magical script. It's more like the veil between my thoughts and the world got thinner. I became aware of a kind of alignment, like the universe was mirroring what I was finally brave enough to feel. Jung called these meaningful coincidences a causal. They don't follow logic or cause and effect, but they arrive with a strange clarity, as if some deeper part of life is speaking to you in symbols instead of sentences. And I felt that deeply. There was one day in particular I won't forget. I had just written a journal entry about how this person had helped me reconnect with my creative side, not through anything they'd done directly, but just by being, by reminding me what beauty felt like. And as I closed the notebook, I looked up, and there they were, in the same cafe I hadn't visited in months. We didn't talk, just exchanged a glance. But in that moment, it felt like the universe whispered, "Yes, you're seeing clearly now." Now, maybe that sounds like romantic nonsense. Maybe you're more grounded than I am, but I've stopped needing to explain it, because it's not about proof. It's about presence, about paying attention. Synchronicities are like breadcrumbs from the unconscious. They ask us to look beyond the surface, to wonder, why this moment? Why now? What am I being shown? And often they don't point outward. They pull us inward. That's what changed for me. I stopped asking, why is this person showing up again? And started asking, what part of me is asking to be seen right now? Because every time they surfaced, whether in thought or in real life, it was like a little nudge from something deeper, something older. And I started to trust it. I stopped pushing the thoughts away or labeling them as obsessive. I got still instead. I listened. I let the moment speak, not about the other, but about me. And every time I did that, I found something, a wound, a desire, a truth I'd been scared to face. Synchronicity doesn't give you answers, but it opens doors, and those doors always lead somewhere important, if you're willing to walk through them. I think we live in a culture that's obsessed with logic and control. We want things to make sense. We want to manage life like a checklist. But some things are meant to feel, to stir, to remind you that you're connected to something far more intricate than your schedule or your phone or your plan for the next 5 years. Sometimes a person shows up just to crack you open. Sometimes a chance encounter is the soul's way of saying, wake up, you're ready now. So if you've noticed these strange alignments, thoughts followed by signs, dreams echoed in reality, memories that seem to call people back into your life, maybe don't brush it off. Maybe ask, what's being mirrored here? Maybe that person isn't coming back into your life for closure or reunion. Maybe they're coming back to guide you into yourself, to show you how far you've come, to remind you of the work still left to do. Jung believed the psyche communicates symbolically, and when we ignore its messages, they find their way into the world around us, through coincidence, through timing, through the people we can't shake. So now, when I feel their presence return, I don't panic, I don't spiral, I pause, I breathe. I ask, what's being asked of me right now? And more often than not, the answer isn't about them, it's about me. There came a moment, and maybe you felt this too, when I got tired of circling the same questions. The emotional obsession, the constant overthinking, the what-ifs and whys. They started to feel like a closed loop, like I was pacing a room with no door. That's when I realized I had to stop asking about them and start asking about me. What was really happening underneath all this? What had this entire experience been pointing to? And the truth was, I had been afraid to feel. Not just surface feelings like infatuation or disappointment, but the deeper stuff. The raw, complicated, contradictory emotions I kept buried. This person had stirred all of it up, not by what they did, but by what they activated. At first, I treated the obsession like a problem to solve. I thought if I could understand it well enough, it would go away. But it didn't, because understanding isn't enough. Insight without integration is just another form of avoidance. What I needed was honesty, so I started writing. Every day, I stopped censoring myself. I wrote the ugly truths, the embarrassing fantasies, the feelings I thought I wasn't supposed to have. I cried, I raged, I laughed at myself, and then I cried again. And somewhere in the middle of all that mess, something shifted. I began to see that the thoughts weren't tormenting me. They were trying to liberate me. Every obsessive loop was a signal, every emotional trigger, a flashlight. I'd been standing at the entrance of my own emotional landscape, refusing to go in because it felt too chaotic. But now I was walking straight into it, and it was terrifying, but also freeing. I began to see patterns I hadn't seen before. I noticed how often I downplayed my desires, how I second-guessed my instincts, how I made myself small to avoid being too much, and how all of those tendencies showed up in the way I related to this person, clinging to an image instead of claiming my own inner truth. The more I felt, the more clarity came. I realized I didn't need this person to see me or validate me or come back into my life. What I needed was to meet the part of myself that had been waiting to be acknowledged, the part that whispered, "There's more of you to live." So I stopped fighting the thoughts. I stopped trying to let go. That phrase, "let go," used to frustrate me so much, because no one ever tells you how. But I think I've found my version of it now. Letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about feeling everything so completely that there's nothing left to carry. And when you do that, when you stop resisting and allow yourself to go all the way into the emotional storm, something happens. The obsession quiets, not because it's resolved, but because it's been transformed. There's a quote I love, I think it was Martha Beck, that says you get your life back when you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What is this here to teach me?" That's the question I hold now. What is this here to teach me? Because it has taught me so much more than I expected. It's taught me that obsession is often a cover for grief, that longing is sometimes disguised growth, that every person who lives in our mind rent-free is showing us a part of ourselves that's starving to be seen. It's taught me to trust my emotional life, even when it's messy. And maybe most importantly, it's taught me that healing isn't neat. It's not a straight line. It's a spiraling inward, a process of remembering what you've forgotten, and then finding the courage to live from that place. So, no, I don't want to erase this person from my mind. I want to thank them, because they became the mirror I needed. And through that mirror, I started to recognize myself again. There's a quiet that comes after the storm, not silence, not numbness, but a kind of stillness, the kind you feel after a long, overdue cry, after the armor cracks, after you've sat with the ache long enough to understand it's not trying to break you, it's trying to guide you. That's where I am now. I look back on the obsession, the endless thoughts, the emotional spirals, the sense of being haunted, and I don't feel shame anymore. I don't feel stuck. I feel grateful. Because it wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a doorway, a signal from the soul that something in me was ready to shift, that there was a part of myself, hidden, disowned, beautiful, that had been waiting in the dark, whispering through the face of another person, "See me, feel me, remember me." And once I saw that, really saw it, everything began to change. The fixation lost its power, not because I forced it away, but because I understood it, I honored it, I let it teach me. That's the thing no one tells you. Sometimes the people who consume your thoughts aren't meant to be part of your life. They're meant to be part of your becoming. They're not the destination. They're the catalyst. And that changes the story, because suddenly you stop asking, how do I make this stop? And start asking, what did this awaken in me? You stop trying to get rid of the feelings and start listening to them. You treat them like messages, not mistakes. And when you do that, when you integrate instead of resist, you come home to yourself. That's what's happening to me now. I've started showing up differently, not perfectly, not magically healed, but more whole, more honest. I speak more freely. I move with less fear. I let myself feel, really feel, even when it's uncomfortable. The person I once obsessed over, they still cross my mind sometimes, but now it feels peaceful, like a memory that changed me, like a teacher I'll never meet again, but one I'll always carry in some way. Not because of who they were, but because of what they helped me remember, that I have power, that my emotions are valid, that I don't need to chase someone else to find what's already inside me. This journey taught me that self-discovery isn't always graceful. Sometimes it starts with longing, with confusion, with obsession. But if you follow the thread, if you stay curious, if you let it crack you open, you find gold in the places you once tried to hide. And maybe that's the quiet gift of it all. The obsessive thoughts weren't punishment. They were poetry, unfinished, urgent, sacred. They pulled me down into myself. And when I emerged, I wasn't the same. So if you're in that place right now, if someone lives in your mind and you don't know why, don't run from it. Sit with it. Listen. Let it teach you. Because it's not about them. It's about you. The version of you that's waiting to be reclaimed. The one who's finally ready to be seen.